Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. My name is Sean Firmage. I will be your host for this webinar. As a reminder, our next webinar is tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. It will be entitled Finding Your Family in the Amazing Online Amsterdam City Archives by John de Jong. Also, feel free to participate in our polls down at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them in the question pods to the right of the slideshow during James's presentation. Today we will be pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation titled Digging into Sources in the FamilySearch Family Tree. James has a bachelor's in Spanish and a master's in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctor degree in law from Arizona State University. He worked for 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He previously owned a retail computer business and an Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 35 years of experience in genealogical research and is a blogger for Genealogy Star and the blog Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona FamilySearch Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. He is the co-author or author of over 25 books on genealogical research and has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 33 grandchildren. And James, we will go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Howdy, this is James Tanner. We're back for another webinar here at BYU, the BYU Family History Library in Provo, Utah. Remind all of our listeners and anyone watching one of these videos that they are recorded and uploaded to our BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. And we'd invite you to subscribe. The reason for subscribing is that we get a higher visibility on YouTube when we have a lot of subscribers. So we're not just trying to pack the voter booths or anything like that, but we are trying to make sure that we do have our measure of visibility out there among the cats and dogs and babies on YouTube and other things, of course. Okay, we're going to talk about today digging into sources in the FamilySearch family tree. And get into that subject, we will start looking at the FamilySearch family tree. First of all, the FamilySearch family tree is part of FamilySearch.org. It is a free, unified, and collaborative family tree. Basically, everything you see on the family tree about dead people, as opposed to those people who are living, are visible to, everything is visible to everyone. So if I make a change on one of my ancestors and one of my other relatives happens to be watching, they will see the change in real time. It's a great collaborative tool. You can help people directly, as I do frequently, and help people on the family tree. And in occasion, you can actually have 2 people online looking at the family tree and work through problems and see what's happening at the same time. So it's a very, very powerful product. The basic benefit to people who are using the product is using the FamilySearch family tree is that because of its unified nature, you can see exactly what everyone has done. Now, if you have your own family tree squirreled away on your own program at home or on your desktop computer at home or on your own private tree on a family tree program, the problem there is that you can spend a lot of time doing research and may not be aware that other people have already done research on exactly the same subject or person. And that is the purpose of the FamilySearch family tree, as a sort of a clearinghouse where information can be put and made available to everyone so that there is a minimum amount of duplication of effort. Now, there's a little bit of a price that's paid on that, and part of that is one of the most common complaints is that things change. Well, the answer to that is pretty simple. Changing is an issue of education. It may be your education as well as the other person's education. You may be the one who has the wrong information or the less reliable information. On the other hand, people have a tendency to assume that everything they put on the tree is absolutely, carved in stone, perfect, and that isn't necessarily always the case. So we really have to be in the situation of being a little bit more tolerant and a little bit more understanding of the fact that things happen. So let's go through that again. First of all, it's free. Emphasize there's no hidden cost, there's no extra charge for premium uh, access or anything like that that's now used in selling software. Unified, meaning everyone sees the same thing at the same time, and source centric, which means that we would like everyone on the family tree to put information only as they find and confirm that information from an historical source. So if you have a document or a record or some kind of document, then we need you to put that information into the tree and that add information only as you find these documents and that support your information. Now, if everybody did that, there probably would the number of disputes would dramatically decrease. But the reality is that people put information in from traditional sources, from things they've heard. They copy other people's family trees. They do all sorts of things. That information really is not a valuable, is not helpful to advancing the understanding of coming up with a let's say accurate is a good word, accurate pedigree. Here's the situation. I mean, you can make up anything. Let's suppose you want to be related to George Washington or some king in England. You could just, put it in your family tree and make it up, okay? But that isn't genealogy. That isn't what we're doing. If you want to write fiction, that's fine. Write fiction, but don't do it in the genealogical community. That's kind of what our attitude toward it is. Now, the sources on the FamilySearch family tree are an integral part of each individual. So each individual has a storage place on their detail page, and this is a blow up of that detail part of the detail page where you can list the sources that you have. Now, we're going to talk about sources and how what they are, what we can consider to be a source, what isn't a source, what is a source, those kinds of things. So first of all, understand that millions of sources are being added to the family tree constantly, and it's growing extremely rapidly. I saw a number in the millions, in the hundreds of millions of sources that had already been added to the family tree. So when you understand that, then you can say, well, okay, let's suppose that I've been researching for my ancestor and I have no idea where he could be found. I have no idea what kind of documents there might be. So we go to the family tree and I put my pedigree part into my part of the tree. Not everyone can see it, of course, but as I get back, all of a sudden I connect with these people that have been doing research, and here are all these sources, all this information about my ancestor. I mean, this is something that happens quite frequently now with the tree, and so it's basically becoming a source of information as well as a place to store information. So you can go here and see what everyone else has found out about your ancestors. Now, unfortunately, from my own personal experience, one of the difficulties with the family tree has been that people don't look at the sources and they don't look at all of the memories and things that are there, and they add information without ever bothering to see whether somebody has already answered that question, raised that issue, or whatever else that they're trying to solve. So this is kind of where we are with this product today. Now, despite this huge number of sources that have been added, it's very, very common to find this notification come up to a person. There's a little purple icon that has a tiny little family tree pedigree thing on it. And if you click on those, you'll find that, probably 8 times out of 10, it comes up with a notice that says no sources have been added. So we have all of these people out there that are undocumented. They have nothing out there from historical records that would indicate that the information that's being presented to us is correct. And I'm I may be a little bit strict on this, but from my standpoint, if there's no source, I don't even believe that it exists. In other words, you have your name there. Uh, you can say all you want about that person, but if you don't tell me where you got the information and give me some kind of supporting citation that I can go check and see what it says, I'm just simply going to decide that that information is not reliable. It's not something that I believe in a sense, and so I will just disregard it. So this may be kind of an extreme way of handling it, but that's what I've been doing. Now, as I go back in my portion of the family tree through my own ancestry, I've been adding sources, obviously lots of sources. And so I feel feel compelled to keep adding sources as long as I can keep finding more and more information. People ask me, well, how many sources are you going to add? And my answer is simple, all of them. Everything I find, everything I know about the person is going to be added on the possibility that the next piece of information that I add may change some of the basic things that I know about this person. Okay, so surprisingly, perhaps not surprisingly, given the background of genealogy where sources were not emphasized, there was really no provision made for adding sources to individuals for many, many years in the genealogical community. Now we have inherited all of that, and we have a unified family tree that shows up with very few sources for some people, for some areas. It's generally further back, but it's not surprising to me that I can sit down with somebody and look at their own parents who may be deceased or their grandparents and find no sources added. Nothing about those people have been added yet. And so this is what we're trying to talk about in this particular segment of webinars here from BYU is the importance of adding these sources to substantiate and corroborate the information that you have in your family tree. Now, some centuries have, and people are continually adding entries without adding any kind of source citation information as to where they got the information. And I've, in situations where this has been challenged, where they've added information which I know is clearly inaccurate from sources that I already have in my portion of the tree and attached to my entries, add a child, for example, to the family that is clearly not part of the family, or add parents who are clearly not their parents because of differences in location or time period or whatever is involved. I basically have had people add my great-grandfather, for example, just one example, my great-grandfather who lived in a little tiny town on the Colorado Plateau in northern Arizona his entire life, called Joseph City, Arizona. Probably never had more than 1,000 people, maybe 1,500 people total in the town, all during the time he lived there. And his two trips out, or two or three trips that I know of that he took, was one to Utah to visit some relatives, and a couple over to St. George, Utah, to attend the LDS temple in St. George. Other than that, trip down to Mesa and Gilbert, Arizona, which are down in the Salt River Valley near Phoenix, and was where he fell down some stairs and died, got injury and died. So this is his whole life, and yet I have had people add children to him who were born in England. So I don't understand how that happened, but that's where we see what happens when you don't add sources and you don't look at what information is already available in those sources. Okay, so let's talk about some rules about sources for the family tree. Obviously, these are somewhat ad hoc rules. They're stuff that I've made up, but I'm suggesting that we need some guidelines and some rules about what are sources, and what should be added or what not added to the family tree. So first of all, I suggest that all the entries in the family tree, including all events, need to be substantiated by a properly evaluated record and accompanied by a source citation. So we need to know where this information came from. Well, they say, well, what if my mother told me that? Well, the answer is that's your source, folks. But we need to know that you got that information from your mother. It would be helpful also if you told us where and when that happened, but if you just knew it, then you did it. Well, what about your own birth date, for example? this is my birth date. I know when I was born, yada, yada, yada. The answer to that is, I, I have personally known a lot of people who had no idea, thought their birth date was on such and such a date, and found out when they finally got a copy of their birth certificate that they didn't have any idea when they were born. They're off. And this happens, by the way, kind of not too commonly, but it does happen in some cultural situations because uh, we have some grandchildren who were born very close to the Christmas season. And so they celebrate their birthday at another time of the year, either a month later or sometimes in the summer or whatever. So the child grows up celebrating their birthday in July, but they keep telling them, well, you were born in December, but we're selling your birthday in July. By the time they're old enough to remember anything, the only thing they remember is that they celebrated their birthday on the 12th of July or whatever day, and that was their birthday. And so when that's how these things sometimes get done. On the other hand, a lot of people just don't even know their birth dates. I mean, they just maybe they live in a type of a family that doesn't observe birth dates or whatever, and so they don't even know what they're born. And sometimes they're actually told the wrong thing. So there's all sorts of things out there, but that's getting a little too over the top on that one. But all the entries, if all the entries had substantial evaluated records and they were, and we know where these records came from, that would eliminate a tremendous amount of the difficulties that people had with the family tree. So what's a source? When we're talking about a source, that term is kind of more than one meaning in this context. And the first meaning is, and this is the way I would suggest that it be the way we talk about sources. A source is a reference or a citation to a document or record that contains information about an ancestor. Okay, it's not the document itself, it's where you got the document. So it's a reference to the document. But the underlying concept here is that we find some record, a historical record, a document, some kind of historical recorded item, that then becomes the basis of us drawing some conclusions about an event that occurred or the identity of one of our ancestors. And then we take that and we document it by creating a source. The source is a reference or citation that lets me go back and look at that same document and make the same evaluation if I wish to do so for myself and determine whether I think you were right or not. If you don't leave that out, then I have to assume you had no basis for making your doing an evaluation. You had nothing to evaluate, and you had no basis for your conclusion. Um, maybe you could argue that I had gotten this attitude or this position from being a trial attorney for 39 years, possibly, uh, basically stating that I didn't take anything into court that I didn't have some evidence to support. Well, and I hate to use that analogy because in the court situation, somebody's going to make a determination of whether I was right or wrong. In other words, we're going before a judge. In the genealogical historical context, there are no genealogy judges or genealogy juries. What we've got is your opinion as opposed to my opinion over the same document or documents. But if we don't know what those documents are, then there's no way for me to form an opinion that agrees with you or disagrees with you. And if the same thing goes for you. You can take my word for it that this was absolutely correct because I think it's correct. But if I don't tell you where I got the information and give you a document to support my opinion, you're perfectly justified in ignoring everything I have to say. So this is kind of the situation we find here. So a source describes where you obtained the information. That's the key thing. In other words, how did you come about coming to this conclusion that this person was born on this date, or that he had this many children, or that that she was married or unmarried, or this person was a school teacher or a carpenter, or whatever. In other words, where does that come from? And if it's just family tradition, it was passed down to me, this is what I think, that's what I heard when I was a kid, that's what we'd like to know. That's the source. That's exactly where it came from. So attach and update the information. Okay, so once you have found this piece of information that's in the record, and you find a record, and I'm going to use a very simple one, and one that's very limited, by the way, because these records are not extreme, they don't go very far back in time, and that's birth certificates. Birth certificates are not something that's a pretty modern invention in the world of record keeping as a birth certificate. Birth certificates in Arizona, for example, date back only to 1906, and in many other states it's similar dates. Back in the eastern part of the United States, it's possible that there are birth records that go back later, but an actual certificate that they provided to someone showing when they were born is something that's quite new. Okay, so let's say, for example, that I find a birth certificate for one of my relatives, one of my ancestors. That's fine. And I attach it as a source. Okay, I do that. Using the procedure of the program, I either create a new source or I go put it as a memory in FamilySearch.org, and then I attach it as a source from a memory, or I do a digitized copy, scan a copy of the document, and attach that as a memory and create a source. There's a couple of different ways to do this mechanically. And by the way, we have a number of videos out there that talk about the process of adding sources to FamilySearch Family Tree. So if you need to go out and find out how that mechanical process works, then we have the videos out there to do that. But what we're talking about here is the conceptual, the idea of what we're actually doing here. So let's suppose that I have found this document that's a birth certificate for my ancestor, and now I've attached it. Now the next step, of course, is what do I have to do with the information? Well, there's a bunch of information on that birth certificate. The one I'm probably most interested in is the birth date. Okay, so now what I need to do is change the information that shows in the details section of the individual to reflect the information that's in the source. That's the crucial point, that's the crucial activity that has to happen. As recently as last night, sitting here in the library helping somebody with their family history, we found a document which gave a marriage date, or I don't remember the exact thing, a marriage or death date or whatever, and it simply wasn't recorded up above. So that document is not magically jump up and say, here's the death date. You've got to go through the process of extracting that information and putting that information into the format where it can be viewed and searched. Okay, so adding a source to the person involves simply attaching the source to that person. When we're talking about adding in sources, we're saying there's a process in the program that links that source to that person and says this source has information, this record or document has information about that person. That's all that we're talking about. We're just trying to make sure that there's that connection between the documents that we find and the individuals that they refer to. So the second part of that, as I just mentioned, is to be sure to change and update the information for each individual mentioned in the source. So if you find a census record that shows that people were all living in Ohio or North Carolina or someplace, then make sure that you make a note of that so that that information updates the individuals and mentions that they were living in that particular place. Now, the program itself, FamilySearch Family Tree, will uh, if you use that program to search for a source, it will, from FamilySearch, if the sources are on FamilySearch, the program itself takes care of most of that. It will attach it as you or suggest as you do that. It'll say review and attach. If you do that review and attach process, then it will update some of the information. But it doesn't do that consistently or all the time for every kind of information. So sometimes you have to look at the document again after you've attached it and see what else needs to be added or what other people have been missed by the program. In addition to that, there's a part of the program called the source box. Now, the source box is the link to a source box is up under your name as you register for FamilySearch Family Tree or for FamilySearch at all. Your name will appear in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, whatever name you've used to sign on to the program, with username or your own real name. And the idea there is click on that, and then when you click on that name up there in the corner, you'll get a drop-down menu that says Settings, Source Box, and Sign Out. Well, Sign Out's obvious. Settings is for you to look at and make changes to the way that the program handles your information. And the source box is what we're focusing on here, and that's a list, a cumulative list of all of the sources that you've added. Now, by default, I add everything to my source box. That makes it, puts it in a big container that if I need to add someone else from that, or add that source to some other person, it makes it a very easy process. So I just add everything to my source box. Well, what happens when your source box gets full? Well, the source box can hold thousands of entries. And so, if you get a source box full entry, you can always take stuff out of your source box. Anything that you don't think you're going to use anymore can be deleted. That doesn't affect the source. In other words, if it's attached to some person, it doesn't delete it from that person. It simply takes it out of your source box. You can think of the source box as like a filing drawer where you can put all your source references in, and if the filing drawer gets full, you can pull some of them out and throw them away, but that doesn't change the information in the family tree. So you don't have to worry about that part of the thing. Okay, so if we're thinking about it clearly, we understand that a source tells other users where you got the information. Now, it also reminds you where you got the information. Now, if you have to go back and think through everything you've done before and figure out if you've done it correctly, then you need a way to go back and find out where you got all this stuff in the first place. Now, over the years, I've taken notes on pieces of paper. I've taken notes in notebooks. I've taken notes on programs. I've scattered my notes all over the place. Okay, so basically, I'm in the process, and have been now for a number of years, of consolidating every last thing I've ever learned about anybody in my family into the family tree so that I can find it. Okay, so even if I have it in a pile someplace in the basement or wherever I happen to keep it, if I put it all in the family tree, it's all organized, it's there, it's available. I can look back and see exactly what I've done. And actually, I can attach as a source or a memory, for example, if I have a whole bunch of notes about all the research that I've done on this family, I can attach that as a memory and upload a digital copy of my notes and just put that right there attached to my individual. Um, I did that with somebody else's notes. I found a whole bunch of notes somebody had made that referred to all these sources they had gone through and had citations to the sources and everything. And I attached that, and I got a flag from FamilySearch that said uh, being reviewed, first of all, and then after it had been reviewed, it said rejected. And I wrote them a little note and said, "Why are you rejecting my notes?" And they looked at it and they said, "Oh, I guess the guy didn't look at it. It's fine." So don't assume that just because somebody said they didn't think it was a good idea, that it isn't a good idea. That's part of the process we have for this kind of interactive program, that we're interacting not just with us, with ourselves and our program in our family tree and our own ancestors, but we're interacting with all of our relatives, and we're interacting with all the other people who are involved with FamilySearch and the family tree. So we have to kind of understand that this is kind of an expansive forum. So just to say this again, I'm going to beat this to death, obviously, but I think that it needs to be, and that's a source is where you obtain the information. Now, we got some interesting problems here. We have a word citation that comes up just all the time. It's one of those words that people love to throw around with genealogy. Citation. The citation is the written record containing the information about where the information was obtained. Okay, now the source is where you obtain the information, the way you write it down, the format, the way the words are put together and how you record that is the citation. Now, this is a touchy little subject because we have a lot of people out there, and it's not me against the academic community. Please do not understand that, you understand that, because I'm so submerged and inundated by the academic community that I cannot believe It is. I have written formal papers. I have had NSF, National Science Foundation grants I've worked for. I have done all the stuff that needs to supply everything in perfect format with all of the exact things. I know all about modern language association citation format and Chicago manual of style and Harvard manual of style and Turabian and every other type of style there is out there. I know a lot of information about citations, and I can create a perfect citation in accordance with whatever format you want. I have all the reference books sitting right there within arm's length sometimes when I'm working. But the answer is, if you don't tell me where you got the record, the citation doesn't do me any good. As a genealogist and as a historian, in the sense of being a genealogical historian, I have to know where I have to go to get the book. Okay, so let me give you the example. We have a perfect book citation. I can go to WorldCat, for example, worldcat.org, and I can click on the drop-down menu, and it will create for me a perfect citation to a book for Chicago Manual Style, 16th edition or whatever the latest edition is of the Chicago Manual Style. The answer is, I now know the name of the book, but I certainly don't know where I got it. And so my question is, a citation should let me find the record. If it's online, it should give me the URL to the place where I can put that direction in and click and go to that citation, to that source. If it's a book in a library, it would be helpful to me to put down that I got this at the BYU library, or I found this in the Family History Library, or I found it in Chicago, in the Newberry Library, or I found it in whatever. But that's the whole idea with the cite sources, is where I got the information. So, I'm not this is not aimed at denigrating the people who write journal articles and have their citation formats or publication formats or anything like that. I'm talking about the family tree. I think the family tree ought to tell us where we got the information, where it came from, so I can go find it again if I have to find it. Okay, that's kind of the end of that rant. So we'll go on here. So what could a source could be? A book. It could be an online database. It could be a letter. It could be a statement made by a relative. It could be anything, any other record or document, anything that gives or provides information about an ancestor or an event in an ancestor's life, or any other relative, anyone that's going into the family tree. So that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And then what's a citation? It's a formal way of recording your sources. That's what that is. It comes down to that. That's the formality of it. And here is a citation. This is a citation that was created in Ancestry.com, and it contains all the information, database online. It has the name and the date and organized data and everything else. The only problem with this is that now when I copy that and use that as the citation for the program, it told me it's online, but it didn't give me the link or the address to where I need to go. The URL is called the Universal Resource Locator. That starts out, like HTTP, all that stuff. That stuff that tells me where to go to get it. So I'm going to have to go look this up and see if I can find a copy of it. And that may or may not be enough information for me to find a copy. Okay, so the family tree, FamilySearch family tree, has a standard form for entering information. It has a number of fields. They're a little bit ambiguous in a sense because they seem to ask for the same information more than once, but they give you a little bit of explanation and some sample information that you might put in those places. I suggest rather strongly, that you fill this out. In other words, we need to know what all of this information and how it pertains to the record that you are using to modify or add information to the family tree. So here's your format from FamilySearch. Now this particular format does not is not the same as a Chicago Manual of Style. It is not a formal citation to the record that would be publication for publication of anything in a journal or other publication. But on the other hand, if you put in all that, all the information you know about where this came from, then the person who needed to use this information for a formal purpose, such as the Chicago Manual of Style, because they were publishing it in a journal or article in a book or whatever, and they were required to use that particular format, would be able to get the information necessary to create their formalized citation. So we're not trying to shortchange anyone here. We're trying to give even more information that perhaps would be required by some of those formal citation systems. And that's kind of the idea here. So there are formal source citation formats for publications, and the important thing is to record where you got the information so that you and subsequent researchers can find the information again if necessary. Now, why is this the whole purpose of this? Well, let's say, for example, I am looking for my great, 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 great eighth generation back grandfather, and I want to know who his parents were. Okay, this is my end of line guy. So I am going to try to document this person as much documentation as I can find. I'm going to find deeds. I'm going to find probate records. I'm going to find birth records. I'm going to find church records, school records, anything I can get my hands on. And I want to list all that stuff. Now, why am I going to list it all? Well, in a year, let's say I get tired of looking for this guy, and so I dump it. A year from now, I'm going to come back. If I don't write all that down, if I don't put everything down where I found all the information, I have to go back through everything and figure it out again. Okay, so I'm going to try to save myself some effort. I become one of my ancestors, deceased ancestors, to my children or grandchildren. I die. They're going to have to come and figure out where I got the information. Okay, so all of that is basically trying to prevent us from having to redo and redo every generation. Every time somebody finds something new, have to redo it all, redo the search. Now, there's a really good reason when you're doing research, and that's a different subject entirely, but there is a really good reason for doing research to go back and plow the same field over and over again. Because you can look at the same record and then a year later look at the same record again and find out that you missed something. And not only did you miss it, you now know more information, and this record is a lot more significant than you thought it was back a year ago or 2 years or 10 years ago. So going back through the information each time you're trying to make an advance is not, it imposes a little bit of redundancy into the research process, but that redundancy makes sure that you are actually making progress rather than simply going back and forth over the same information all the time. But if you haven't recorded it, there's no way for that process to occur. So we're really basically looking for ways to make advances in genealogy rather than simply going over the same information and providing the same set of information that we have for years and years and years. Okay, now here's the question. When is the source not a source? Okay, so we're to the point where we have gathered information and we want to know, should I include this or not? Is this something that we want to know? My answer to that is if you think of that question, you should include it. It's not an issue of whatever, but it's also an issue that, yeah, there's lots of people that save lots of things. I mean, we call them hoarders, and they actually save everything. You can be a hoarder of, well, anyway. As dealing with estates, probate estates and things in my years as an attorney, I had the opportunity on occasion to have to deal with someone who had died who was a hoarder. And that was not a pleasant experience for me or their relatives. But what we want to do is not throw everything in. There's obviously some things that don't belong or are not sources and really don't contribute to the whole project here. So what are we talking about? So when the information provided does not contain the specific information needed to support the entry. So for example, it doesn't do me any good for you to say, here's my birth, here's the date of birth, and down here to list a document that doesn't have any reference to the person's birth. Okay, so that's, it may be an amusing anecdote or story about the person, but that doesn't mean that that helps me determine when this person was born. And unfortunately, once again referring to the family tree, you go down through the sources, and here's all these dates and places up here, and you go through the sources, and none of the sources have anything about the dates or places. So how do you know if the information is correct? 6 sources, 10 sources, 20 sources down there, and the 20 sources, not one of them gives the person's birth date, and yet there's an absolute birth date down to the day. And you go, well, okay, well, where did the birth date come from? Go through every single one of the records listed as a source, and not one of them talks about the birth. So why is there a birth date there? And that gives you to the next session that sources are not, it's not a question of weight. You get into this argument about all sorts of different kinds of legalized kind of quasi-legal things where you're talking about whether this is a primary source or a secondary source, or if it's hearsay, or if it's all these different terms have been thrown around and they somehow have landed over in the genealogy. The answer here is that a historical source is something that talks about the person. Whether we believe it or not is our personal judgment, evaluation, and opinion. And I may have a different opinion than you have, and somebody else may have up with a third opinion. That's where we talk to each other and come to a consensus, or we refuse to talk to each other and we fight, or whatever it is. But that's part of the game here. But we're basically here. It doesn't help at all to say I have 15 sources if none of those sources address the issue of resolving the particular question that we're trying to talk about. So, for example, I don't care if you have 100 sources. If nothing tells me his birth date, the birth date is conjectural. You've made it up, as far as I'm concerned. So that happens, by the way, more frequently than you would believe. Because I've had many people come to me and say, oh, I have all the sources to support this, and basically go through every single thing they have and say, yeah, but where's the one that shows who this person's parents are? They go, well, it's right here. And you go, well, where is it? And they say, well, all the sources that I just gave you. And I say, well, I just went through everything you gave me and nothing about the parents. And so then, of course, this is an intro. So we've got to get over the situation that's saying if we just add some bunch of things, one of the things that also happens with the FamilySearch family tree is that we have a thing called record hints, and we've talked about that in other webinars. But the record hints are hints; they're not necessarily even apply to your person. So you have to be careful in evaluating those. And people will simply add in all the record hints, and of course they're not even the right person or the right country or the right time period or whatever, and so they're not sources, and they are then detached, and that's what you do when you don't have the right source. Okay, so, and then the problem is also that the record or document may not apply or is inaccurate in itself. So just because you have a document, for instance, the most common one that I can refer to are these surname books, the books written about a remote ancestor and their descendants, or someone and their ancestors. These are, we call them surnames. They're based on people being related because of their surname, common surname and common relationship. So these books out there by the million, there are tens of thousands of these books, hundreds of thousands probably of these books out there, and many, many, many of them. In fact, the vast number of them. I very, very rarely run across one that's adequately documented. Even if they have a few documents at the beginning, they will suddenly disappear. All the documentation will disappear, and it'll just be a long list of names and relationships and people. Wonderful place to get started, good way, good suggestions for doing research, but they are not sources. They do not give you a place that I can go back to verify the information that's there. And it's telling me you got it out of this book. That tells me where you got the information, but it also doesn't tell me that it doesn't give me any greater value, allow me to put any greater value on the information that you've provided to me than no source at all. So there must be some connection between the source and the information that's provided. So that's kind of the, so the information provided does not contain the specific information to support the entry. So if this meaning, this is not a source if the information is not supported by or contained in the the, the document or the record that's referred to in the source. That's kind of a different way of saying what I've just been saying, that there has to be this one-to-one relationship between the record and the information that is put forth as being supported or supplied by that document. The best record is the one that's created at or near the time of the event, recorded by someone who participated or observed the event and had a duty to report it. Okay, this is kind of the definition of a primary source, but the word primary source itself is misleading, and that that's another issue altogether. And the reason why that's misleading is because you have a tendency to believe, because this is a primary source, that this is absolutely correct. It's just the best record is the one that's created at or near the time of the event by someone who participated or observed the event. That doesn't mean they were right. Um, after taking testimony in court for many years, it was always very obvious to me, and abundantly obvious, that you could have 5 witnesses see the exact same event or testify about the same event and have 5 completely different versions. So just because somebody was there and recorded it does not make that the most reliable record. So this is another thing. And all records need to be carefully evaluated as to reliability and applicability. They have to apply to what you're talking about or trying to support, and they have to be reliable in the sense that there's some basis that connects this to the person, the reason why that event was recorded. Okay, so for example, okay, it's this, a person gets to be of age and there's a war going on and they get drafted into the Army or Navy or whatever. And they have to file certain papers when they're put in the Army. Well, the people who are recording that person's life as they join the Army basically are going to be officially required to be as accurate as they can. But the person joining the Army does not have to be telling the truth. And we get stories, endemic stories, of people who lie about their age so they can join the Army. Now they're trying today to resolve that kind of stuff. You could do it in years past, but today you've got to bring your birth certificate with you. And so that's why we have birth certificates, actually. If you really want to get to it, it was started because the government wanted to make sure that people who were available to vote and who were available to own property or whatever and to serve in the military, their lives were documented to the point where they couldn't just walk in and represent that they were older or younger or whatever than they were. But it's very obvious. I dealt yesterday with a situation, it was the same one I referred to earlier, and this one was even a more extreme example of what happened, is that I had two U.S. Census records from the 1900s for the same person. Okay, 2 different records for the same person. One showed him as a child in a family, as a single adult, 21-year-old son of the family, as a single person. The second one showed him with his wife and baby. So which one was correct? And it turned out that that if you looked at the places where those 2 censuses were taken, one was in Los Angeles, the other one was in the San Fernando Valley. So this guy didn't bother to tell his family that he'd been married for a couple of years. But they listed him still as a child in the family, in the home, as a single adult, even though he was probably living with his wife many miles away in San Fernando Valley. So you have to evaluate this stuff, and it has to be evaluated as to reliability and applicability. And believe me, when we had that, we had to go back and try and document this guy's life from the day he was born to see if they really were the same person. And the answer was they turned out to be the exact same person. So it's interesting how that kind of occurs, but those are the kinds of things that we're talking about when we're talking about creating sources, because we have to document that very carefully so that that particular circumstance doesn't become a situation where all of a sudden somebody says, no, they're really two different people, and so now all of a sudden we've got duplicate people and all sorts of problems going on. And getting back and going any further uh, back in time becomes almost impossible. Okay, so the best information is when more than one document made at a different time and by a different person corroborates the information. That means supports or contains the same information. Okay, so if somebody uh, has a record of a birth, say it's in a Bible record and it says they were born on such and such a date, and then later you find a draft registration record in the United States and they put down the same birth date as their birth date, and then later you find a death certificate and it has their birth date and that birth date is then repeated, then you start to believe that perhaps that birth date's correct. And now the answer is it really correct in a metaphysical sort of philosophical thing, or is it just your approximation of reality and et cetera? Anyway, we don't want to get into that. We're not genealogists. We're not trying to get into the philosophy of reality and what's real and what's not real. What happens is what I used to say when we went to court, and I was interviewing my clients in preparation for a trial in the court. And I would say, uh, first of all, things you've got to understand is you're going to give testimony in court, and that is your truth. That's what you truly believe to be correct, assuming you're not going to lie. And then I would say, you're going to find the other side giving their testimony in the court, and their testimony is what they truly believe, and that's going to be their truth. But then the judge or the jury, or the judge and the jury, are going to make a decision about which one they believe, and then that becomes the truth of the court, and it may not be the same as even your or your opponent's testimony, because they can come up with something that's entirely different than either one of you. So that's what I call the truth of the trial. Well, this is the same thing here with documents. Historical records are historical records. They're simply items that were recorded either casually or officially or whatever, but they create their own reality. So if your birth date is recorded on a certain day, that's when you were born. Now, what if you were actually born on a different day? We don't care. It doesn't matter anymore, because the record says what the record says. Now, if we find another record and it records a different date, then we have to come to a decision as to about which one is correct. But so the more documents that we pile up, now there's really a trap here when I say this, more documents, because you can just simply copy the same document over and over again. Now, our family, the Tanner family, has a series of surname books, of books about the Tanners, talking about a remote ancestors, that began in the 1800s and then were reprinted in the 1895. 1905, there was a book written about the same information. 1910, there was another book written. A major book written in 1942, another book about in the 50s, and another book in the 60s. Every one of these books copied the basic information that was in the original book. All of them were wrong. Subsequent documents, more than one document, showed that they were wrong. But the fact that we had 5 books in a row did not add anything to the veracity of the original information. Okay. When the information is provided in an official document that's intended to be relied upon by someone viewing the document. Okay, so it's best if I can get somebody who swears in court or testifies or gives an official document that must be recorded or must be, so if it's a deed or if it's a testimony in a probate action or if it's some kind of a certified action like that, that's probably should be given more weight than one that's casually created for whatever purpose. A letter between two people, but the letter might be the one that's correct as opposed to the official document. It's not impossible that people lie. The source should always tell where to find the information. I'll repeat this a few times more because it's very important. We need to know where you got it. And if your source doesn't tell me where you got it, it's not a source. It just doesn't tell me the information that I need to know. So here's an example. Another example. This is a citation. Brown, comma, Cyrus Henry, comma, 1983. Brown genealogy of many of the descendants of Thomas, John, and Eliezer Brown, sons of Thomas and Mary Newhall Brown of Lynn, Massachusetts, da 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 da. Okay, so this is a citation to a book. Okay, now where would you go to find this book? That's the question that I have when I ask over and over again to people. Okay, but here's the book. Okay, I found it. It's online, and here it is. And this particular book, completely digitized, I can read it and everything. It contains a transcription of an entire deed. Okay, so it's got the deed transcribed right there. But I don't know if that's correct. The citation states that the original deed is in the possession of a family member. Doesn't identify the family member, just says deed in possession of a family member. And this is an old book, so I'm not going to be able to dig up this family, well, literally, dig up this family member and ask him or her any questions about the deed and or whether the transcription is correct. So how do I know the transcription is correct? The answer is I don't. Where would I go today to find a copy of the deed other than the transcription in the book? I have no idea. I I can search for it online. I could try to figure out where they got the deed in the context of the places where these people were living and things like that. I may be able to find that deed, but the source citation telling me that they copied it from some family member doesn't help me at all. And that makes it very difficult. So if the original were destroyed, you'd have to trust the author's transcription. What if this original deed now that was in the possession of somebody is no longer in existence? So now the only thing I have is the transcription. So that's my document from then on. And that may not be anything like the original. They may have done a very poor transcription of it. So can I verify it from the original document? The answer is apparently not at this point in time. And so the rule here is we always check the original when possible. In other words, if I say, oh, I copied this out of a book, I go look at the book. If I look at the book and it says I got it from someplace else, I go try to find where I got the information originally. So I trace it down to the place where it was originally recorded. Whether that's at the time of the event or sometime later in the event, it doesn't matter, because then I have gone as far as I possibly can to verify that the information is correct. Okay, now I'm going to refer to this, and it's a bad analogy. I'm going to have to admit that. It's the best evidence rule. But I think it's a good idea. It's something you should keep in mind. And it's the idea there, or the best evidence rule was one that said that you should always bring in the document that's closest to the original if the original isn't available, and that it had to be the one that contained the most information and was not a derivative document. So you didn't bring in something that told about the original document, you brought in the original. So you always try to bring the best record or document that you can find, and that's kind of the rule for historical research also. So what's the best? An original document's better than a transcription, an original document's better than an index, and an original document is better than a summary or an abstract. So if we're going to work from any of these things, then we need to remember that there's some place out there, there's another document that's going to be more reliable perhaps than this particular type of record. And by the way, this is an actual list of sources from the family tree when we're going to talk about what is not a source. And they may tell you where the information came from, but they're entirely useless. Okay, so what is this? Here's the information from those sources. And I'm going and I didn't really get you a list to look at the sources. You're just going to have to go look at it yourself. But here is the source, the information that came from those sources. If you can't read it on your screen, it's Adam, the first man, and Eve, the first woman, and their children are listed as Amag ben Adam, Timor ben Adam, Seth ben Adam, second patriarch, Noaba ben Adam, Abel ben Adam, Amran ben Adam, and Amwan bet Adam, and Azurah bet Adam, and Cain bet Adam, and Elam ben Adam. Okay, there they are. They've got birth dates, everything else in there. This is what we got from those sources that were listed. Simply providing a source does not validate the information. Just because I listed where I got it doesn't mean it's correct. I'd like to know where you got it. Yes, but I can then go back and see whether or not it makes any sense. But in this case, I'm not even sure I would spend any time at all going back and checking this. This is from the family tree, by the way. In case you wondered if they got back to Adam there. Yes, they do, and here it is. And these are all the children they corrected. By the way, according to this, Eve was born in the year 4000, but Adam's birth date is unknown. So we don't know how old Adam was when he got married to Eve and lived in the garden. Okay. So a source goes beyond merely providing some imaginary or bogus place to look for similar information. I mean, it's just that we got to say that, folks. You can't get out there in Never Never Fantasy Land and try to establish this by claiming some bogus source information for everything. And it should be all the information kind of summarized should be supported by valid. Now the word valid here means validated, evaluated, and carefully considered sources that are able to support the conclusions that you've made about the way that this person that happened to this person. And if a birth date's entered, there should be a source showing a birth date or otherwise indicating where the information came from. So that's just a simple way of putting it. And we need to stop name matching. We need to stop putting in people who, just because this person's not the same name or the same surname, that suddenly all of a sudden they're related and in the same family. It just happens so endemically that we just cannot possibly fight that sometimes. Names, dates, and places all need to be consistent. So consistency is also one of the criteria that we look at. Does this make sense? So you have a child born at a certain date and another one born and another one born and another one born. The consistency there is what's important. And if you keep going after the mother dies, then that's not consistent. That's not what we're talking about with consistency. And it should form a consistent pattern. All of the information should fit the way that people would actually have lived and actually spent their lives. Any inconsistency should be carefully documented with well-evaluated sources. So that if you have somebody that's an outlier, that's somebody that lived way away from the family, or from the mother went out, had a baby for some reason, at some distant location, then all that should be documented and not just assumed to be correct without documentation. The key here is evaluation. And I repeat that word over and over again: evaluate, evaluate, and evaluate. Look at it, see if it makes sense, see if it's consistent, see if it has anything you need to do. Who provided the information? These are some questions. Did the person participate in the experience or the event? Was the time lapse between the event and the record? Did the person who observed the record or the recorded events actually create the record? Was the person drafting the record in a position to know or judge the accuracy of the information? How consistent and believable are the records or documents within the existing time, place, and circumstances? Take your time and do a good job of adding sources. And thanks for watching. I'd like to thank all those who attended the live broadcast, and also remind them that this is being recorded and put up on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel for view at a subsequent time, and remind everyone to
All right,
subscribe.
perfect. Thanks, James.
Thank you very much.
If you didn't get a chance at the beginning of the webinar, feel free to enter your information in the polls here at the bottom of the screen. And tomorrow's webinar will be at 1:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, just as another reminder there. And we look forward to seeing you in the next webinars. All right, thanks.